Since the 1800s, we as an audience have been captured into the world of visual storytelling. We've been shocked, amazed, inspired, broken-hearted,
Why do you always jump across the car like that?
Because it looks cool. You try.
and have laughed over and over again.
You okay?
I think I crapped my pants.
Film has allowed us to open up our imaginations to this whole new world that we can visually discover, and get completely lost in a story for 120 minutes or more, and sometimes even less. And without celluloid film, we wouldn't dare to dream big, or we wouldn't have believed it was possible without seeing it first. Since the 1880s, celluloid film has been the primary filming platform and has been used to capture and project moving images for more than 100 years.
At the cinema, we had a very big projector with a 2,000 watt lamp. So you imagine a small house light bulb. This one was like this, and it had gas inside it. It was gas filled, and the electrical charge ignited the gas between 2 points, and that's what gave you the light. The projectors we used to have were German projectors called Kinetons, and you could either use small reels top and bottom, or in the case of us we had a thing called a tower system which had huge reels attached to it which you could play up to 3 hours of film on, and then obviously it would go through sound processes, the sound processor, and then it would be projected onto the screen.
One of my favourite comedies, actually, Young Frankenstein. And one of the things that sticks out in my mind is you watch the entire film and you're absolutely transfixed. But what you don't realise straight away is it's actually in black and white. It's a completely black and white film. It was released in the, I think it was late 70s, early 80s, something like that. So there was no reason for it to be in black and white other than to capture a tone.
It was just an art to getting the film together, running it through the projector, making sure it was all on screen as sharp as you could get it, as colourful as you could get it. And it's a lost art now. I don't like digital because there's no projectionist anymore. There's just somebody who comes in on a Monday and programs a computer.
A lot were black and white, I remember those. And sometimes, certainly when I lived in Germany and I watched them in the army in the smaller cinemas, you had to stop and change reels, so there would be a gap in between the film.
Recently, a new technology has been invented, pushing aside the art of developing film by hand and using a digital format to display a cleaner and more defined motion picture.
I've always believed in the magic of movies.
Yeah.
And to me, the magic of movies is connected to 35mm.
This new invention has torn the film industry, with some left worrying if the analogue film will vanish and the original film development will be completely forgotten.
If the intention is that digital's going to replace film, I would be sad if it didn't actually exactly replicate it.
They process digital now to make it look like film, as if film is inherently better. Just we like the way it looks better, which seems kind of arbitrary. It's just what we're used to.
Obviously the clarity is very much better nowadays. Obviously since the digital era, the quality of the pictures and the sound quality is obviously a lot better.
Film is a 19th century invention. We are at the top of the photochemical process. This is about as far as it's ever going to go.
Digital is here now, but it's going to keep going.
To me, using digital's far, far better. There's so much more you can do with it. You can do it faster. The dynamic range is absolutely enormous, especially in the sound department.
It does nothing for me. I mean, I actually think I'm getting gypped when I go to a movie and I realize it's either been shot on digital or being projected in digital.
But I don't mind watching DVDs of old films because more often than not they've still got all the scratches and blemishes on there where they haven't, what they call it, digitally remastered, where they remove all the dirt and stuff. So yeah, it's a bit of one and the other really.
It's the same with everything, things become obsolete irrespective of their inherent artistic value. It all becomes about what's cheap, what's easy to use, But with the advances in technology, I think we're going to see things going. I think digital technology is going to stop chasing the film aesthetic and actually develop its own into new areas, which is both exciting and worrying at the same time.
For the image to be captured through the camera, a film strip had to be inserted inside the camera, so when the light passes through the lens and exposes the strip, it is captured onto the negative film. This film strip had to be changed every 10 minutes, as the film would run out. The film was then placed into acetic acid and water, which developed the footage captured.
There's a certain leap of faith that you take when you shoot film, and there's something really romantic about that. Getting your dailies back and everyone being really excited to see what you got.
The development of digital filmmaking in the film industry made things a lot easier for cast and crew. There was no more waiting around for the next day to find a mistake, as film monitors that were connected to the camera were created. Therefore, filmmakers and crew could see exactly what was being captured there and then, and if anything were wrong, for example an object not being in frame, they could cut, correct and restart straight away. Using film to capture onto was now a thing of the past, and using an SD card was a new way to not only store footage, but it allowed more than 10 minutes of footage to be taken without having to stop and change, depending on the memory size of the card. One of the latest camera technologies that uses analog film to capture and record is the IMAX. The area of an IMAX film frame is over 10 times larger than a 35mm film, and over 3 times larger than a standard 70mm film. This extra area makes the images sharper and more vibrant than other film formats.
When you see the picture in IMAX, you will have that feeling that you're never going to see it quite the same way ever again.
A camera frequently used in the digital filmmaking is the Red Epic Dragon. This camera on its own weighs 23 kilograms, however other equipment can be attached, for example a monitor.
The way in which you shoot IMAX is a little bit different. The lenses are very wide, it's a very tall image. So you do need to adjust your framings somewhat, but actually once you get into the rhythm of shooting it, and very much for the audience watching it, you can make it more and more like the way you would shoot a regular 35mm film.
The majority of media shot using an IMAX camera are documentaries or short films, due to the cost of the film and the process that IMAX involves. However, Christopher Nolan's Batman: The Dark Knight was shot using an IMAX and works extremely well. As many films are shot using the Red Epic Dragon, Gone Girl, directed by David Fincher, is one example of many movies using this camera.
Where in the 70s particularly, and most of the 80s, they always had a person called director of photography who would make sure every frame was as good as it could be.
The process of editing analogue film was mostly done by hand, or using a small device that helped splice each piece of film together.
In the old days, a film would turn up in a large metal can with up to 7 reels in the side. Each reel would contain between 15 and 22 minutes of film. This particular reel is actually 1,836 feet, which works out to 18 minutes and 36 seconds. These are soundtracks. Now you've got a digital soundtrack, which is the 2 tracks that look exactly the same. In between these holes is the Dolby Digital soundtrack. You would find the edge of the frame, which in every case was 4 of these holes. Make sure it's all down. Best get the air out as best you can, and And then you put the film, turn it over. And there, hopefully, you have a join. And if you remember what I was saying about peaks and rounds, as it runs through a projector, it should go round. See that?
Yeah.
Okay, as opposed to it going like that through the projector.
Yeah.
Because the speed that this is going through the projector, the pressure on those joins is quite high. And then because you've run this one across and you get the next reel and do the process all over again until you've got it, the whole film sorted out. And that's how you put a film together.
It makes the editor's job extraordinary because they're often ploughing through masses and masses and masses of material.
With analog film, you were also able to add in colour tints to the frame. However, this enabled the possibility to lose aspects from that scene as they become too overexposed in different areas. For example, if you wanted a bright blue sky, you would lose other aspects that complete that frame. That being said, most movies then were captured onto film and that's what you got. Therefore, at the time, this was amazing to see and was the true beginning of film editing and manipulation.
I've never actually edited with analog film, but part of my training as a sound engineer was to work on analog 2-inch tape, which was very, very technical, loads of work involved, calibrations of the equipment. You had to use magnets to calibrate all the stuff. You had to use cleaning fluids, make sure all the heads were clean, all sorts of problems involved with that sort of stuff. So although I've never worked on analog film, I should imagine it's pretty similar sort of thing as that. So lots of calibrations, lots of different difficult techniques that you have to get your head round, and lots of technicians that need to be employed just to get it to work.
Using a digital camera, the footage is recorded straight to an SD card. The SD card is then given to an editor to put all the scenes together. Professional editors use software such as Final Cut Pro, Adobe Premiere and Avid to splice all the shots together, compared to analog film, where this process would all be done by hand.
If you've got two bits of film, if they're not spliced properly, as they run through the projector, they will peak. And that's sometimes when you get breaks. So you had to have this art of joining the film in such a way that it would curve as it ran through the projector. And the other thing about projectors, and a lot of people didn't realise, that the soundtrack on the film was always running ahead of the picture. So if you're looking at the picture going through the projector here, the sound for that frame of film was down here, 32 frames ahead of it. And there was 24 frames to a second of film. So 100 feet of film was basically 1 minute.
After an analog film has been pieced together, there was only one existing film reel of that movie. So to be able to distribute the film to more than one movie theatre to play to the public, the film would have to be duplicated multiple times.
So there was an art to making sure you got the splice correct. If you didn't, sometimes if you'd be watching a film and a reel change would come through, you'd hear this like thud, which means that was the join going through, and it picks it up on the soundtrack.
I remember there was popcorn and hot dogs, and they used to have an interval as well. So unlike now where they play the film all the way through, they used to stop the film halfway through, probably to change reels. And you can go out and buy hot dogs, Coca-Cola, crisps, sweets, a bit like now. And one of the things they used to do, which is now illegal, when it was coming up to the interview, when the film was running around, they used to put like 3 pictures of a hot dog in the film. But your mind, your subconscious would see it, but your conscious wouldn't see it. But what it would make you do is when the interval come, because your brain had seen that hot dog, you think, well, I want a hot dog. And so you used to go out and buy a hot dog. But that's now been outlawed. You're not allowed to do that.
It was obviously in them days when I grew up a little bit. Obviously, my grandma and I's first date was at the pictures, and I think can't remember, I'm not sure, but I think we went and saw Ben-Hur. And in them days, you could smoke in the cinema, so it wasn't the best place to be. So it was all smoky, and as the smoke rose, you could see where the projection of the film onto the screen was, because it used to sort of light up as it went up onto the air. So but that was it. You could, in those days, you could there was obviously a lot more cinemas around than there are nowadays.
To distribute multiple copies of a digital movie, using a computer, duplicates of the movie were burned to discs and then given to professionals to look over. Then, when successful, they were given to cinemas to play to the public.
The films, when we weren't using them, were kept on the reels because it'd be too much work to take them apart every night. But we used to cover them over with a nylon sheet. Now, nylon, I know it sounds like it's got static and everything in it, but it's less dust, funnily enough, than if you used a cotton sheet. And because the worst thing about film was dust sticking to the film, as it ran through the projector, there's such a minute gap in places on the projector when the film runs through. If a piece of dust catches, it could actually scratch the film. And sometimes in the old days when you see the films and you used to see a yellow or a green line, it's because it's taking a layer of film off of the picture. If the line went white, then you'd taken all the picture off. So yeah, no, it was you had to be very, very careful when you was using film, because that was one of the drawbacks of film. It was very susceptible to scratching, so the picture quality would gradually degrade over time. See, I still like a lot of the films from the 70s, because although they didn't have the technology, a lot of the stunt work in like the James Bond movies, for instance, of the 70s, everything was done in front of the camera. Now it's all done on a computer in an office in London somewhere. You know, some of these car chases and all that sort of thing. So it was a lot more innocent, a lot more naive than it is today. And I think a lot of films today are basically, look what we can do with special effects, and forget the story or forget the script.
And with CGI they can do lots and lots of fantastic things, although I personally think they overdo it sometimes with the CGI and there's no realism. So if somebody falls off of a great big building and it's CGI, you're like, well, it's fallen off a great big building. But in old films, if somebody actually fell off of a building, you knew it was a stuntman actually doing that. So you were like, oh, that's impressive, you know, or if a car crashed or blew up or something, you knew it was actually somebody doing it. But now you're not always sure because of CGI.
There's too much digital, too much special effects, and not enough story nowadays. Sometimes you're pleasantly surprised, but most of the time it's about the budget on the effects and doesn't really interest me anymore.
This is amazing!
3D film is a strange one for me because it's not actually a new invention. Some of the earliest films back in sort of the 20s that's when 3D technology first got developed, and then in the 50s it was big, and then kind of 70s as well, so it always comes around.
It was probably when I was out with the grandchildren somewhere, possibly, I don't know, somewhere perhaps like Legoland or somewhere like that. I can't quite remember now, but I remember they were doing things like going on a roller coaster, and then I believe, if it was still right, you went on a fire engine or something like that through the streets of San Francisco, because it's obviously San Francisco is very hilly, and I'm pretty certain you was on the fire engine and you was going up and down these things. It was quite enjoying. They also had 180-degree screens in some of these theme parks, which literally took the whole of your vision. So you had the screen wrapped around it, so it was actually in it. It's quite good.
What do you think about 3D films?
Scary because it comes out at you.
I think the small independent family-run cinema, or even the old-fashioned cinema chains, there was something quaint about it. It's not now. It's all in your face. And yeah, I know that's progress, but so if I have a choice of seeing a film at a multiplex, and I know there's a little independent cinema somewhere showing it properly, I would go to the little independent.
It's always been a great experience being able to go to the cinema with my mum and dad and my brother and my sister. As I'm older now, I've got my own children, it's a nice experience again. But it was particularly nice back in the 80s. It was an absolute event to go and do those things.
What's your favourite film and why?
Despicable Me, because it's funny.
They're not showing the films properly because they're not putting enough light through the projector, which means the films are a little bit duller when they shouldn't be. I mean, I don't know if you've ever noticed, sometimes if you see a film at cinema and then you see the trailer for the film on the television, it's always a lot brighter. It's because the television's showing it at the proper light level. But also, if you get this arc of fuzz in the corners of the screen, it means that they haven't done maintenance on the projector lamp and stuff like that.
You're watching television on a big screen, and Quentin Tarantino said the same thing. So I do notice sometimes when I go and watch a movie nowadays, when things are fast, when there's lots of action going on, it can get quite blurry and lots of kind of motion trails, and it's very difficult to keep up with. Where if you watch those same films on a smaller screen, I'll give you a key example. There's a sequence in the new Avengers film which I found quite disorientating to watch, and then when I saw that clip released as part of the promotional package online, it looked like I was watching a different film. It was so much clearer because the image and the way it was being shown were kind of in synchronisation, whereas in the cinema you're taking a big image, showing it not through a necessarily ideal projection system.
I don't go that often, but if we get an interesting film, then I do enjoy going to the cinema. I do think nowadays the cost of the refreshments as you go in is a little bit expensive nowadays compared to what it was.
I think it's just it being a night out. Although whereas before, because people didn't have such busy social lives with so many things available to do, and obviously the internet and computers didn't exist and all that sort of thing, it was more of an event. It was a bit like if you go to the West End Theatre now, if you was going to the cinema, it was more of an event. Whereas now I think people just think, all right, we'll pop into the cinema for a couple of hours and then we'll do something else.
What's your favourite thing about going to the cinema?
Popcorn and sweets!
Don't forget, man, we're gonna get them on the run. We're gonna go, 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 go. Henry on to the stop. We go that goal line. Don't forget, man.
Film has changed so much over the last 100 years, from how we visually see it in the cinema to how emotionally connected we as an audience can feel throughout the duration. But there is one final question that I believe has no answer. Whether you prefer analogue or digital is all based on personal opinion.
Oh, I think digital films, obviously the quality is much better now than what it was when I first started going.
Yeah, most of my favourite films are shot on analogue. I can't think of a really great film that's come out in the last 10 years. I'm struggling to think of one that's come out. Gladiator was a great film, and that was shot on digital. The format itself, I don't think it's that important. Really isn't. It's just a matter of capturing the images.
I think digital, because obviously the format is so much easier to watch, and these days bigger screens on television or on cinema. But some people, a bit like records, some people prefer records. They say they've got a warmth to them, and I still love watching the old black and white films. Sometimes they've been digitally remastered, which obviously means you've then got an old film that's better quality. But some of my favourite films are some of the old films, like Singing in the Rain and stuff like that. You know, that's a film from a long time ago. I still like watching Laurel and Hardy and Harold Lloyd and some of the old black and white comedy films, and I still find them humorous. And if you watch them on the format of the time, it adds a realism to that age, because obviously they were made for that time. So I think that's good.
And so I will always go for film.
I feel it's inevitable that the world will continue with digital and move away from film purely because of the ease of access. However, by doing this, we are choosing to leave behind the art of creating film by hand and losing the originality of how film first came about. Without it, I wouldn't have made this documentary, and the world would carry on reading books and using imaginations. But personally, if I'm watching a film to be able to be engrossed in it completely, I would choose to be watching the best image quality possible. Therefore, I prefer digital over analogue. However, I will always be open to the idea of watching an analogue film because I wouldn't like the idea of something that was once treasured being lost through generations. It's like saying, how long after a new phone model comes out do people upgrade from the old to new? There will always be someone who chooses to keep the original, and there will always be someone who wants to have the latest technology. Either way, it will be appreciated and not forgotten.
Good in this world, Mr. Furl. And it's worth fighting for.
There will always be people who like analog. There will always be people who will be enthusiastic for it.
Wherever there's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there.
You get to sit with all your friends and have a laugh.
The Force will be with you, always.